Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I guess it didn't occur to me when we set the book release date on Valentine's Day that people might do things on Valentine's Day, but I've been married like 30 years, and it didn't occur to me that people might have plans. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here and for letting this be part of your Valentine's Day. Those that are physically here and those that are out there in cyberspace, it's really great to have you share this book launch date with me. Also, thank you to Malaprops for being ballsy enough to host this as this is an edgy topic for some people. This makes some people really uncomfortable, and so it's great that you guys are willing to do this. And I've been in the area almost 25 years and love Malaprops, and now I love you even more. So thank you very much for that. And then I have to do a special thank you to the Matco Supper Club. Some of you are here today. This is we moved up to Madison County a few years ago and live on the side of a mountain. And so we have this supper club of people that get together, and you'd think it's because we live close to each other, but it takes 30 minutes to get from one part of Madison County to another part. But Saturday night I hosted, it was my night to host. And we had the party where we stuffed all those bags that people get when they get a book with condoms and lubricant and all sorts of things. And so that's what the Matco Supper Club did together on Saturday night. So special thanks to the Matco Supper Club. So I want to kick us off with just a little interactive thing. This is something I do a lot when I teach lay audiences, sometimes teenagers, young adults, sometimes older adults, to see where you are. It's sort of like your way of gauging, do I need to read this book? Is there information in here I might need? So I'm going to try to put this down so I can write. This is the part where I'm going to ask you to name some things. And if you're like most audiences, you tend to not want to answer. And so I bring candy as an inducement. Usually they're STD themed candies. Because it is Valentine's Day, everything was kind of boring. So I brought hugs and kisses and hearts. But normally I bring like Mike and Ike's, which is for men who have sex with men, and or hot tamales, which is the burn of herpes, or blow pops. I don't need to go any further. But anyway, I bring lots of themed candies. So if you answer, it's a very good chance I'm going to peg a piece of chocolate at your head. Try to catch it. Try not to get hurt by it. Okay, so the first question, this is easy. And actually, Chrissy, will you help? And when people answer, we throw the candy at them. Thank you. All right. Okay, this is the first question. This is easy, guys. I just want you to name sexually transmitted infections. And so for the record, I'm going to use sexually transmitted infections and STD and STI interchangeably. This has been a point of great controversy in the sexual health world. So it was STDs forever and ever. I still work in an STD clinic. I'm on a CDC committee for STDs, but we decided it's more politically correct to call them STIs because there's a sense that having a disease is more stigmatizing than having an infection. But a lot of people haven't picked up on the new acronym. And so I am old school. I've been saying STDs for a very long time. I'm trying to get better about it, but I will go back and forth between the acronyms. So throw out, I just want names. Yell out, and folks that are in the virtual world, write in the chat all the sexually transmitted infections that you can think of. And let's see how many of them you can get. Gonorrhea. I got gonorrhea. Chlamydia. I heard herpes. I heard mpox. What else?
Genital warts.
Oh yeah, genital warts. Syphilis. What else? Huh? Lice, yeah, pubic lice. What else? You guys got a long way to go here. We are nowhere close. What else you got? AIDS, good. HPV. Yes, and so HPV goes into the genital warts, but it also causes high risk things like cancer. What else? Oh, there's so many more, guys. Come on, you can do better than this. That's all you got?
Give us a hint.
The trichomonas. Yes. That was my sister, and she knows that trichomonas is my favorite sexually transmitted infection. And which makes me, so one of the things I do in my book is I have some limericks because I'm a big fan of rhyming. All things should be rhymed. So I'm going to share my trichomonas limerick with you. For some, it begins as a trickle. Some men, when they pee, feel a tickle. The symptoms, they vary, so clinicians, be wary. Trichomonas is capricious and fickle. So I have tremendous respect for trichomonas. Okay, what else? Nothing? Y'all got nothing? Hepatitis, yeah. So, and that's a good one because there are two of them, right? There's B and C, and some would even say A in some kinds of sexual interactions. What else? Anything else? Coronavirus is, well, it is sort of sexually transmitted because you're really close to somebody, but not like in the genital fluids. Somebody said, did I hear BV?
Yes.
That is not actually a sexually transmitted infection, but it does increase your risk of getting other sexually transmitted infections. Molluscum, boom, yeah, molluscum. Molluscum contagiosum. That was good. Was that from someone online?
That's an online participant.
Well done, online participant. BV, bacterial vaginosis, is not considered a sexually transmitted infection, but it can increase your risk of other sexually transmitted infections. It's considered a cofactor. Let's see. How about, y'all did pretty well, actually. This is pretty good. Yeah, I got that up there. Monkeypox, which I do have a new rap video, which is just dropped this weekend about monkeypox. Instead of MC Hammer, you can't touch this, it's Mpox, don't touch that. And so anyway, that's on my website if you're interested in some of my rap videos. Okay, so I did not hear Mycoplasma genitalium. Oh, what? Y'all are asking yourselves, what is that? It's a good reason to read the book right there. This is a problem. All right, we got chancroid. Nobody mentioned chancroid. Nobody mentioned lymphogranulum venereum. I didn't hear that. Did anybody hear that? No. What about Zika? Oh yeah, in the semen. Zika. What about Ebola? Sexually transmitted as well. And we got pubic lice. Did we skip pubic lice? Yeah. There's also scabies, which is kind of a friend in there. I think that's PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, is caused by many of these things: gonorrhea, chlamydia, mycoplasma genitalium. Yes, PID, and that's actually in another one of my limericks that I'm going to share with you all today. Okay, beautiful, well done. So here's the list. So if some of these, if we heard me call these out and you were like, I've not heard of that, it's a good reason to read the book. There's things out there you don't know about. Now, the next thing that's really important is just like a baseline level set. This is pretty easy too. Is where are the body parts that can be infected with sexually transmitted infections? Now, some of y'all might feel really shy about this, so why don't we'll just go on and give everybody credit for the genitals, right? Because we know that that's definitely a part. What other parts can get sexually transmitted infections? Mouth, yeah. So what can you get in your mouth? You can get syphilis, you can get herpes, you can get HPV, gonorrhea, you can get chlamydia, all sorts of stuff you can get infected in the mouth. What other parts?
Eyes.
I heard brain, which is true. You can get lots of brain. That you can get herpes, encephalitis, you can get syphilis in the brain. That's actually one of the first cases of syphilis I ever diagnosed, was tertiary syphilis. Eyes, heck yeah, the eyes. All sorts of things you can get in the eyes. You can get syphilis, you can get herpes, you can get chlamydia, you can get gonorrhea, all sorts of things in the eyes. Any other body parts you can think of? Nose? Yeah, syphilis. You can get, syphilis used to break down people's noses. Mm-hmm. We'll give credit for that. What else? Skin, yeah. So like all over the skin, you can get all sorts of things. Syphilis shows up, secondary syphilis on the skin. You've got scabies. Monkeypox is definitely a good one. You can get gonorrhea. Disseminated gonorrhea makes you get pustules all over your body. Speaking of gonorrhea in weird places, where else can you get gonorrhea that we haven't mentioned yet?
Rectum.
Rectum, yep. So the anorectal area. What's that?
You said South Asheville.
South Asheville. Yeah, you can definitely get it in South Asheville. But you're more likely to find it downtown. You can get it in the joints. And I tell a story in my book about a guy I took care of who got it in his knee after a work trip. And he ended up having to go to the operating room to have his knee cleaned out. So let's see, any other important, I mean, there are lots of body parts. I think we've hit most of them. The heart, You can get it in the heart. You can get infections in the liver. So there aren't many parts that are actually safe from infections. All right. Now, how are we doing on time? I can go on like a really long time. Y'all are gonna have to really time check me on this because I get really excited. Okay, so why did I write the book? Well, I first became interested in sexually transmitted infections. Probably there was some interest in my high school years because, and I tell the story about the theater company I was part of, and we went to see the first AIDS quilt on the spread out on the ellipse in front of the White House, and it was really transformative. I didn't even know what AIDS was. It just was an eye opener. But really during med school, I went to medical school in East Carolina, down on the coast of North Carolina, not the coast, but towards the coast. I sort of referred to it as the armpit of North Carolina. It was just like really hot all the time, flat. There were no mountains. But it was on the I-95 drug belt. And at that time, it's where the drugs would run from Miami to New York, and people would fall off the drug belt, which was during the crack cocaine epidemic, and then they would come to us essentially to die. A lot of them were uninsured, but we saw a tremendous amount of AIDS. So these young, beautiful men dying tragically of AIDS because the first drugs were just coming out, but they were too expensive. People couldn't, if they weren't insured, there was no way you could get the meds. And so that was when I really got interested in infections and started in my residency. I did some rotations at the STD clinic here in Buncombe County, and I've never left. They keep trying to get rid of me, and I keep coming back. So it's always been an interest of mine, but it's sort of, I like to say it's my side hustle. So my day job is, I have a big policy job in Raleigh, but this is always my favorite thing. My favorite place to come back is to come back to the STD clinic. I started noticing 6 or 7 years ago that the age of the population that I was seeing in clinic and also in urgent, I spent a lot of years working in urgent care. So a lot of people will seek sexual health in an urgent care environment because it's a little more anonymous. They don't necessarily, they might not know the doctor that they're seeing. They might be more comfortable confessing to certain behaviors than they might be with their primary care doctor, which we'll talk about. But I started noticing that people were getting older. I was seeing more and more people that were older. First, it was people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And one day I realized that something was definitely different when someone in their 80s came in dragging their oxygen tank with a new herpes outbreak. And I was like, there's something happening here. About that time, I wrote my second rap video, which is STDs Never Get Old, which Bob, my brother-in-law, came up with that title on a Facebook competition to see who could come up with a good title for the video. But it's a homegrown video. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it, it's linked to on the website. Most of my family is in it because it's just a homegrown video, but it got like immediate attention, went viral. People wanted to talk about older adults having sex. And it was bipartisan. It was during some really complex elections that were happening, but on the same day, Breitbart and Mashable linked to it, which is kind of unusual. And so folks were interested in this. So I started looking at the data, and I first looked at North Carolina data, and I was seeing that year after year, we were doubling our rates in the 55 to 64 and the 64 and up categories for almost every sexually transmitted infection that we measure. It was doubling. And so I started looking around, and that's when you might have started seeing headlines. The Villages was in the news a lot a few years ago. They are like the fastest growing zip code in the country and have been for some time. But so started seeing this pattern and got the idea when the video was so popular, I'm gonna write a book because we gotta do some more education around this because most people haven't had sex ed recently. And if you had sex ed when you were in high school and you're now 60 or 70 or 80, the information you learned, if you even got sex ed, which most people didn't, it's just not up to date. There's new information out there. And so the pandemic comes along and I thought, this will be interesting to see what happens. Well, I kept working at the STD clinic and it turns out people still had sex, even though there was a pandemic, like a lot of sex, but they weren't necessarily coming into the clinic and public health resources were strapped. All the public health clinicians were busy taking care of COVID and doing vaccines and doing all the COVID response work. And so there were less appointments available in sexual health clinics all around the country. And the reagent you used to test for chlamydia and gonorrhea was the same thing that's used to test for COVID. And so all of a sudden, we couldn't test people. So if people came into the clinic, there was this shortage of reagent. And so we couldn't screen everybody like we used to screen. And so you see this, what I will call a false decrease in 2020 and 2021, where it looks like sexually transmitted infections might have, it even just looked like it stabilized, which should be a little scary. But despite the fact that there weren't appointments, people couldn't get into public health, and there weren't the tests to do, they still didn't drop off. And now we're seeing what I'm describing as the tsunami of infections, because I've seen more acute new HIV and syphilis in the last year than ever before in my career. So the infections continue to grow. So who is the book for? That's a question a lot of people ask. Well, I would say it's definitely for people that haven't had sex ed in the last decade or so, who just get caught up on sex ed. I think it's also for people that have friends, maybe parents, that are going into new relationships, so you want to be a resource and you want to be up to speed so you can give them good advice if they ask you questions. I think it's a great resource if you have kids or grandkids, because then you can be a resource and you can see what, teenagers today are facing a totally different sexual milieu than you did when you were a teenager. And so understanding what the world is like for them is really important. There's really good information out there in the world. Obviously, if you're a healthcare worker, work in a retirement community, in a skilled nursing facility, administrators, there are all sorts of people like this that might benefit from the book as well. But I feel like the information is basic and accessible and everybody really could use it. So I'm going to just read a section from the opening, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I cover in the book. This is called You May Be Wondering Why I Called You Here Today. Mary was widowed at a relatively young age, in her early 60s, following a decade of her husband's chronic illness. Her sex life had long since ceased, and after his death, she assumed she was done with love and intimacy. She felt blessed for what she had experienced in her marriage and certainly did not expect another chapter like the first. After a period of grieving, she settled into a solitary life, being a support to her adult children and grandchildren, gardening, volunteering, until her world was turned topsy-turvy. She hadn't imagined dating again after losing her lifelong love. Then in her mid-70s, she was asked out on a date. She couldn't imagine being romantic with another man, not at her age. She hadn't had a date in decades. How did that even work anymore? Horrified, she vehemently rejected her pursuer for almost a month. He was persistent. She was intrigued, and thus unfolded a tale of two septuagenarians, widowed, discovering an unexpected world of dating and intimacy well into their golden years. Mary's story is the new norm. Widowers, lifelong bachelors, divorcees are finding more and more love, intimacy, and romance later and later in life. So much so that even the popular television show, The Bachelor, is launching a version for seniors looking for love. And there's never been a more opportune time to be in an intimate relationship or have sex. This applies to all consenting adults, but it's especially and uniquely true for the aging population. Who's in that lucky club, you might be wondering? Let's be honest. If we're lucky, we'll all be part of the aging population, because as my dad used to say, aging beats the alternative. Granted, the pandemic did throw some cold water on some of the fun, but all hope is not lost. For the purposes of our time together, I'm talking about the 60+ crowd. And here's the best news yet. You don't age out of sex. Older adults across the country and around the world are experiencing a sexual awakening that all the younger people who might be reading this book can only hope to one day enjoy. So what makes today different from 1980 or even 2000? And I go on through the book to tell you all the things that are different today than 20 years ago or 40 years ago. I talk about some of the trends that we're seeing around technology and sexual networks, dating apps, hookup apps. Can you all name some of the hookup apps that older adults are using? Anyone know any? Grindr. You said that with eHarmony, Senior Match, Silver Singles, Bumble, Zeus, Our Time, OkCupid, Elite Singles, Christian Mingle. There are so many hookup apps out there. So they're in the book. There's actually a great article that just came out last month that lists the top 10 hookup apps for seniors right now. And it tells you what's good about them and what's bad about them. So we have this new way of meeting people and getting together that it's not just for the younger generation. We are also seeing this cultural acceptance of gender diversity and sexual acceptance that's different than it used to be. And so people that maybe had repressed their sexuality for some part of their life are finding that they can now be sexual in their true self in a different way. And so that's creating different risks. And people are retiring early. thanks to investments and federal programs to help people retire, people are retiring at an earlier age and they're living in community more than ever before. So guess how many retirement communities, so not skilled nursing or assisted living, how many retirement communities are there in the United States right now? Someone throw out a guess.
1,800.
1,800, 5,000, over 20,000 retirement communities. And so they employ over 1 million people. So this is a huge part of our economy and how people are choosing to live. And what could possibly go wrong? So let's think about college days, right? So in college, you're living in close proximity, you're drinking together, you're going out, you're having fun, but you still got to go to work, and you got to study because you have exams, and sometimes that's a drag, and you might get pregnant. And there are all these things that are, well, guess what? All of a sudden, you're like 65 and retired, you got money, you got time, you got no classes, you got no work, you can just do whatever you want to do, and you're not getting pregnant. You heard it here first. No one's getting pregnant. So it's a great time to be intimate in that group living environment. And people are taking advantage of it, and they should. One of the other things that creates risk now that's different is drug resistance. So who heard the headlines? Anybody pay attention to the headlines last week around drug resistance? One of the first cases of drug-resistant gonorrhea was found in the United States. There are actually 2 cases in Massachusetts that was just in the headlines last week. So UK had it a couple years ago. They had like 1 case, I think. But now we've got drug-resistant gonorrhea. Gonorrhea is something we've been able to treat for a long, long time. Suddenly it's got resistance to all the drugs that we can throw at it. That's a big deal. And so that's really different than 20 years ago or 40 years ago. That does make me think of a limerick I like a lot. Known by the famed moniker, the clap, gonorrhea freely flows from the tap. Throat, anus, and joints, this infection appoints with drug resistance a worrisome trap. The other thing we have is asymptomatic infections and extragenital infections. So I showed you our person with all the different places they can get infections. A lot of these are asymptomatic, so they don't know they have them, and they're spreading them. There was a study done last year that shows gonorrhea, you get to get gonorrhea from kissing now, potentially, which is very distressing, right? So it's important that people are having conversations, getting screened and tested, and being smart when they're getting intimate with somebody. So in the book, I do go into some detail about all the different kinds of infections. I don't go into deep detail. This isn't medical school, but it's enough that you can feel caught up and up to date on what are the big trends and patterns with the different infections. I talk about what it might feel like to have them, what it might look like to have them, and how you would go about taking care of them. I spent a lot of time talking about prevention. So prevention in the form of condoms. Guess who doesn't use condoms? Older adults don't use condoms at all. They're terrible. AARP has all these articles about condom use in older adults, and they don't use them because they're not worried about getting pregnant. And they just assume that other people aren't at risk, or maybe they just don't know about all the infections and the places you can get things. So we're not using barrier methods like dental dams, the female condom, all those sort of things. More information about those in the book. And then there are these vaccines we have, which are incredible, but they don't really work in older adults, and they're not indicated in older adults. But still good information. If you got kids and grandkids, it's not too late for them to make sure they're vaccinated against things. I do have a whole chapter on the good news. And this is things that aren't sexually transmitted infections that get in your junk. So there's a great chapter about, hey, these are the things that are benign and are going to go away, and they're not worrisome or stressful. And I kind of have a call to action to physicians saying we should do better. As doctors and healthcare, we tend to assume people are asexual once they turn 60. We stop asking the questions. We stop exploring whether they have healthy sex lives, good sex lives, different sex lives. And many of you, maybe you have great open conversations with your doctors, but there are a lot of doctors out there that stop asking those questions, or they just make assumptions about your sexuality. And so I think this is an area where we could all do a little bit better. So one of the things I did want to talk about what I don't cover. So thing number 1, I am not a sex therapist. I see the people once they've had good sex, then they come to me with the infection. So I'm not a sex therapist, and you're not going to get that in the book. I don't go into deep detail on treatment, and that's because treatment's constantly changing. Even in the time that I was writing the book and it was going through edits, I had to change it multiple times because recommendations changed on treatments. So I don't go into a lot of detail on the treatments and things. That's something you'll work out with, but I'll tell you if it's treatable or not treatable. And I don't go into as much history as I would like to cover because there's a lot of really interesting history to syphilis and gonorrhea and some of these infections. I go into a little bit of it, but not as much as I'd like. I'm going to read one more little section and then we are going to go to questions and answers. So this is from chapter 6, treatable, incurable, potentially life-limiting STDs. I was asked to lead a discussion with the older women's Bible study at my downtown church because a few of the women had heard of my rap video, STDs Never Get Old, and they were curious. I was told this group of 20 or so 60-plus-year-old women met once a month to discuss various topics in one of the members' homes after sharing fellowship and dinner together. I arrived that evening after a long day in clinic wearing my STD scrubs. I wear scrubs to the STD clinic for 2 practical reasons. 1, my husband made it clear that on STD days, I am to wear clothes that can promptly go into the wash upon arrival home. And 2, statistically speaking, the odds of getting body fluids on oneself is higher than average. I was tired and regretting that I committed to this unusual venue and another night away from my family. Usually my public speaking is in an auditorium or an online venue, and I've grown to prefer large groups just from a time management point of view. I like to project my presentation on a large screen because as entertaining as stories can be, nothing beats a good picture combined with a backstory. I knew this would be different. The church secretary informed me there would be no screen or projector, just the living room and attentive faces. The living room was spacious, but not designed to accommodate audiovisual equipment, so the computer and projector I had brought with me would be of no use. I rationalized this was just as well. Surely these women had seen their share of genitalia in their lifetime, and they didn't need the pictures of pus dripping off the end of a penis or anal warts to help tell the story. Since I wasn't sure how this would roll out, I'd done some homework, and I filled up several 2 by 3 foot sticky papers with fill-in-the-blank questions, true-false statements, anatomic drawings, and discussion questions. As I prepared this the evening before, I prayed that I would not horrify or overwhelm these aged ladies with incredibly non-traditional Bible study content. I was greeted with incredible enthusiasm and kindness as I made my way around the room meeting the various attendees. I'm fairly certain the average age was well above 60. After a lovely covered dish dinner, everyone gathered in the living room with my big sticky note presentation front and center. What followed was the most energetic, honest, and riotous 2 hours of my STD teaching career. The women were surprisingly eager to learn. I don't understand. You can do what? I can't even imagine such a thing. Oh yes, that's very good advice. I have a friend. These women were not afraid to ask tough questions, to be open about their concerns about friends, and to try to understand the reality for their grandchildren that's very different from what most of them had lived. By the end of the night, all the ladies were text messaging their grandchildren, if they were teens or young adults, or friends, encouraging them to get the HPV vaccine, to use condoms, to make sure they were getting tested. Their enthusiasm was infectious. The ladies were particularly alarmed to learn about and understand more fully the link to cancers from HPV than many life-threatening STDs that are out there. This chapter focuses on some of the most common sexually transmitted infections and the ones older adults will surely encounter. In many ways, it's the scariest because the infections in this chapter have a significant risk of being life-limiting or leading directly to death. While it's possible to die from syphilis, unless you're an unborn or newborn baby with congenital syphilis, it's highly unlikely in our advanced state of medicine. The rare herpes encephalitis, which can occur when the first herpes outbreak spreads to the brain, can be deadly, but the odds of that happening are really quite small. And while I've had patients who said they would die when I told them they had genital warts, the evidence points to the contrary. So we're going to open up to questions and answers, but first I want to say there are a few things I hope you take home if you don't take home anything else. Thing 1 is make sure you're talking about your sexuality with your doctor, with your primary care provider, and ask questions and answer their questions honestly. Speak openly to new partners and insist on having the dialogue over what their risks are and whether they've been tested and when they were last tested, and make sure that you're on the same page before you become intimate together. And talk to your friends who are engaging and are thinking about engaging in high-risk sex and be a resource for them. And finally, go for it and enjoy late life sexuality. The goal of this book is not to terrorize and traumatize. It's just to have you go out there and be smart about it and make sure that you don't get something you wish you hadn't got. And so with that, I will turn it over to questions and answers. So I passed around some index cards to people that if they wanted to write down their questions, but if you're bold and you want to yell them out, I'll take it that way too. And then online if there are questions. Yes.
I got the first one.
which is, I haven't heard a thing about UTIs, even though they're not transmittable really, it's definitely a factor, because you get all rubbed up on there.
Yeah, so urinary tract infections themselves aren't a sexually transmitted infection, but for men, a lot of the times they get a urethritis, which is inflammation of the urethra that comes from chlamydia or gonorrhea. And so we call them gonococcal urethritis or non-gonococcal urethritis, which is different than a urinary tract infection formally. People can get UTIs that are not sexually transmitted.
Yeah, but you can get,
But
exactly
sexually transmitted infections can definitely feel like a UTI. And we see that a lot of the time, particularly, and this is something I've seen with older adults, particularly women. They go in with urinary tract infection symptoms. They pee in the cup, they get some antibiotics, the culture comes back and it's negative. And their symptoms are maybe better, but then in a few weeks it comes back again and their culture is negative. Well, has the doctor checked for chlamydia or gonorrhea or mycoplasma genitalium? Because if you're sexually active and at risk, that urinary tract infection with the negative cultures really might have been something else. And we're not necessarily good about checking for that. Yeah.
Do you want me to read the
Sure.
questions out? Okay. What can be done for vaginal dryness besides topical oil?
That's a great question. So there are hormone therapies. We've made great progress on hormone therapies for women. Depending on your risk factors for breast cancer and cardiovascular disease and blood clots and those sort of things, it's really a decision with your doctor about whether it's a good choice for you. But there are several other topical treatments for vaginal dryness. It's one of the things that's made later life sexuality so much more successful. Men have erectile dysfunction drugs, and we have great drugs for women for vaginal dryness, which is a very common symptom after menopause.
If you have been monogamous and then celibate for 2+ years, could you have an STI?
Potentially. Sometimes people have had infection for a lot of years and they just don't know it. Some of the infections, and I talk about this a lot in the book, last forever. So what's the difference between love and herpes? Herpes lasts forever. So some of these infections you can have forever, and then they can they show like genital warts and herpes are the big ones that you might have had for decades that can then reactivate. So potentially, yes.
This was a comment. Please write an article for AARP if you haven't done so already.
I've been beseeching AARP to pay attention to me, and they are not yet. So if any of you guys have inside connections, let me know, because I think this is one of those times where you got to know somebody who knows something.
Kind of a tongue-in-cheek question. Have the Village's developers filed a libel lawsuit against you yet?
I am actually a little worried about that because I do quote some articles that were out around the Villages and their rates of sexually transmitted infections. Everything is straight from other reputable sources. I would love to go to the Villages and have them let me come and do a big talk, but I'll go to any big retirement community and do a big talk because this is my favorite thing to do, to get into the weeds and talk about this stuff. Any other questions? Anything from online? Oh, there's one back here.
Shannon, thank you for that great summary of the demographics of what's happening right now. And this light bulb went off for me. We old hippies are now seniors. And we went through the summer of love, which became the decade of love. And I'm wondering if that is correlated to what's happening now among that generation.
Absolutely. There is no question, but our sexual revolution kids are now showing us how to retire differently. And I mean, so the folks from the 60s taught us, they helped us turn around book bans. They helped us accept pornography, make masturbation normal and okay. This group is now retiring. And so it's no surprise that they are pushing the edges of retirement, swinging and doing all sorts of things that people don't think of traditionally with older adults. And so I actually reference that a fair amount in my book. That we continue to learn from the sexual revolution generation. They're just teaching us at the next stage.
Sorry, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I know, you need to do that. Yeah. So, yes.
So, other than all of these horrible sexually transmitted infections, is there any reason that older adults shouldn't have sex?
No reason. If it's uncomfortable. So some people have trouble getting past the discomfort. So sometimes they've been through cancer treatments. So sometimes maybe if a man's had a really aggressive prostate cancer treatment, despite all the best drugs in the world, the parts don't work. That can happen. Some women, maybe they've had breast cancer and hormones aren't an option for them, and the other things just aren't really treating their symptoms, and it's just too uncomfortable for them. It doesn't mean they can't be intimate and find other things to do that are pleasurable, but you have to be careful. There's a whole section on things that can give you infections, like inanimate objects, sex toys, in the book, because we've seen a lot more people coming in with infections where they've shared sex toys with people and not cleaned them in between. So that's, I talk about that. I talk about all sorts of fun things in the book. Mercy.
Shannon,
Yes.
did I hear you say that you could have genital warts and not be aware of it?
Yes, quite a few of the infections are asymptomatic, meaning that you don't have any symptoms at all. And then sometimes all it takes is some big stressor. But particularly in the older adults, you'll find people who maybe go in the hospital with pneumonia and all of a sudden they break out in herpes. And they haven't had a herpes outbreak in 30 or 40 years. They didn't even know that it was herpes when they had it. And they, for whatever reason, their system just suppressed it. They had a good enough immune system, but when they got really, really sick, it came back. You see this a lot with genital warts and people who have organ transplants or they go on immune suppressing drugs and they haven't had genital warts in years and years and years. And then all of a sudden they're covered up and because their immune system's been suppressed.
So what tests for STIs do you recommend that older people have before their partners?
So in my book, I go through different categories. So it depends on your risk factors. So there are different categories of risk, from the lowest risk, women who have sex with women, to your highest risk, which are men who have sex with men or women who have sex with multiple men who have sex with men. So there's this whole sort of broad spectrum. Most people should just get the very basics, which is their HIV test. They should be checked for hepatitis, syphilis, chlamydia, and gonorrhea, and all the parts that have been exposed. So if you've had a new partner with oral sex and you haven't been checked for chlamydia and gonorrhea afterwards, you probably should be, or at least have the conversation with your doctor about it. Some things we don't have good tests for. So we can't test people for genital warts. We don't routinely test people for herpes. When they come in with sores, we will, and there are some circumstances, and I talk about that a lot in the book. It's pretty complicated. But your family doctor or your GYN should be really up to date. And if not, we're always there at the STD clinic at the health department, and we love seeing people of all ages and helping them figure out what their risk factors are and treating them appropriately. So shameless plug, as we wrap things up, my website is right there, shannondowlermd.com, easy to remember. On there, I've got links to all my YouTube videos. My latest one, besides the Mpox one, which was fun, a few weeks ago, I was inspired on my drive home from church to, instead of grandma getting run over by a reindeer, grandma got infected with a virus. Oh yes, so on Christmas Eve, she was swiping right. She hooked up with Fred and she got herpes. Not to be a spoiler alert, but anyway, you can link to a lot of my limericks and videos and other things. Because we should just have some fun while we're talking about all these things. So I hope you'll go to the website and check out some of my content. I'm happy if you want to have if you are part of a book club and you'd like to use my book for your book club, I'm happy to show up and lead a discussion with your book club. Just reach out to me. There's a contact me link through the website. Happy to do that. Looking for connections with AARP and the Villages and other big retirement communities, Givens, any place that would like to have me talk, I'd love to go. So the last thing is, if you're buying a book or if you have a book to be signed tonight, we have these swag bags that my Madco Supper Club helped me pack. One of my, so Looky Before Nookie is the theme. I tell my teenagers all the time, if you're comfortable enough to have sex with somebody, you should be comfortable enough to scrutinize their genitalia. Now, do I think they will? No, I don't, but I still give them a keychain flashlight that says Looky Before Nookie on it, just to remind them. So in the bag, there are some condoms and some lubricant and a keychain flashlight for everyone to thank you for participating in the book. And I will close with one final limerick. This one is about chlamydia, which is one of the most common infections we see in all ages. Dear chlamydia, your timing's not great, but it sure was a fabulous date. The fellow looked clean, if you know what I mean. Perhaps PID's just a matter of fate. And so, ending with that. Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for